What do you like about reading, Crystal?
I like giving my minions my books to read so that I can relax in the pool all week. What do you like about reading, Andrew?
I like reading the books for you as your minion.
Ladies and gentlemen, this week on the Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast, we're doing things a little bit differently.
I don't like it.
Welcome to the Goldilocks and Three Cares podcast, the podcast where we take a look at a self-published novel and discuss what's too hot, what's too cold, and what's just right. I'm Crystal.
And I'm Andrew.
And what did we read this week, Andrew?
This week we had a request by Miss Red Harvey to read A Grey Life.
So what is this book about, Andrew?
It tells the story of a world gone mad from three characters. A young boy, a young girl who are school friends, and they have kind of their own storyline, and then a young woman who happens to be a prostitute. And it really tries to answer the question of
Sorry, I'm
who
laughing.
just happens to be
No, I'm laughing because before you're like a hooker.
a hooker.
You kept saying hooking.
Yeah, but then people would get confused with like rugby. They'd be like, why is he talking about a female rugby player? And they're trying to survive in a world that's slowly decaying. That Law and Order from the beginning of the book till the end of the book kind of goes by the wayside, and rape and murder and pillaging and robbery are rampant. And just trying to find the little shred of hope in there.
So what was too hot about this novel?
Well, as I said, the narrative, takes place from three different viewpoints. The young boy who's kind of journaling, recording in a diary, the events that have taken place, where he is, a young girl who's being, her story is being told in the third person, and then the young woman whose story is also being told in the third person, but not in a linear fashion. They're kind of jumping backwards and forwards through time. It takes place in, a dungeon where, the boy and his family are being kept and they're being tortured, or a motel where there's, bad people that are around. And for the first 3/4 of the book, not a significant amount happens. And when it does happen, it's neither of the two characters, the boy or the girl, who are really affecting their own circumstance.
Okay, so you felt that they weren't in charge of their own story.
No, and really not. Especially, the challenge with writing the journal is the boy's recounting from a 12-year-old's point of view what has already happened. So we know the boy's not really in danger because he's writing the journal. He's made it. It's his history. With the young girl, she's in the first half of the book and then kind of gets on a plane and goes, and she's gone for the rest of the book. She never comes back. And then her storyline becomes more the hookers, the rugby players storyline, the prostitute storyline, and she kind of takes over from there with her arc. But I found it very difficult for the first 3/4 of the book to get into something which was essentially about, rape, torture, and murder without really seeing the characters affecting their circumstance.
It reminds me of a podcast I listen to. It's called Writing Excuses, and it's the best sort of writing podcast by some really well-known authors. And in this particular episode, Mary Robinette Cole pulled out an outline of a book that she was going to start working on, and she had the other authors critique this outline. And about halfway through, one of them stopped her, and I can't remember who it was, but they stopped her and said that all the action was happening to the secondary characters. The main characters were not taking charge of their destiny, so to speak. They were not the ones doing the action and taking control and taking charge. So in the case of this boy and his journal, I think you mentioned in a conversation we had about this, that he's writing about the others who are with him.
Yeah.
Nothing really ever happens to him. He's writing about these other people who we only see for a few chapters, and then they're gone. Which then brings another question of, did you feel connected to these characters? Did we go deep enough into the story to really connect to them?
Well, I did for one character who was, the prostitute Juniper. She was a great character. She has a power, which they reveal later on in the book, which is pretty cool. And it's something that, had the story been about her and had she been in the entire book and the other two characters were kind of woven in and connected, I think it would have had a lot more effect and would have probably drawn the plot along a little bit quicker.
What did you think was too cold about this novel?
Some of the things that I noticed were around the physics of the environment and just things that you wouldn't necessarily know as a writer, but if you're writing about them and you get it kind of wrong, like readers pick it out. Like, for example, in one scene, two characters in a car and something smashes the window and the glass flies inwards and, large pieces of glass cut the driver. Safety glass has been around since the 1930s. It doesn't break that way.
Yeah.
It wouldn't cut things up. There's also reference to, the hum of a solar generator. Solar power doesn't need to turn over a generator. It just kind of generates electricity that goes through a battery.
Right. So
just things that if you've never, had a solar panel or if you've never been in a car accident to know what the effects are and the physics of it, it's like, I guess my question to you as a writer is, how do you write about things that you haven't experienced that are very specific that way?
this is a tricky one because sometimes you assume things, right? As you assume that you're right about something when you write it. And that can get you in a lot of trouble. So the options that you have really is to find specific readers to pick out specific things that, if you have a doctor friend, they'll catch out or they'll pick out medical things. Mm-hmm. You have someone who's really into cars. So for example, in my novel, there's a Mustang that the main character really loves. And you know me, how into cars am I?
Not at all.
Not at all. No, not at all.
I think everything's a Jetta to you. It's like, what kind of car is that? It's a black Jetta.
So what I did was I first went online because that is a pretty good resource. That being said, I do take things with a bit of a grain of salt because Wikipedia isn't the dictionary.
No.
Or an encyclopedia. And picked out a picture of this Mustang, wrote about it. But then I had two readers who I knew were car guys, one of them actually had a Mustang. And so they were able to point out, there aren't headrests on the Mustang. There's
bench seats, drum brakes, just things that if you've been in a car, you can kind of get that experience.
Exactly. Another case, we have one of our characters, my characters, ours, smashing into a windshield, in a car accident. Someone who was a cop had read this passage and told me that, chances are the person's actually just going to smash into the windshield and their journey ends there as opposed to going straight through. And then I had other people telling me that, well, they knew so-and-so or a friend of a friend or whatever, it had happened to them as well. So while you do your research, you then, at least about the topic, so then you can make a decision as to whether or not the action is going to happen, but at least you can make an informed decision as opposed to I think this does this.
Another thing I found that was too cold was a little bit on the pacing, and there's two kind of pieces to that. The very first thing is I found like the first 2/3, almost 3/4, a large number of secondary characters, don't make it. In a variety and increasing number of
That's
creative ways.
That's a nice way of saying that, yes.
They die. And in the last third and quarter, that's when everything starts to happen. There's a flight out of the country, there's an escape, there's another escape. It's like then, the horrors that are out there in the real world that aren't people start to really appear. And it's like you see maybe one of the demon characters in the first half of the book, and the last third is just a lot of demons. And I found that was kind of a challenge. And then all the action also happens in that part of the book too. And I found that it was paced a little bit. I found that it was paced in a way that kind of detracted from the action, that a character was having something happen to them, and then they're looking around and feeling and experiencing things that, in later times they would look back on and say, wow, I'm really surprised we made it out of there. Whereas in the moment they're saying, I'm really surprised I made it out of that.
Right.
When that's not something that they would really think.
And I think there's two really good points there. First of all, you have Aristotle's sort of storytelling arc, which is, I'm not the first person to say this. This is within drama and film, act plays and writing. which is, you have your first plot point, second plot point, midpoint, third plot point, and so on. And you need to hit certain things in those points. Otherwise, the story feels disjointed and bottom heavy, as you're describing in this case, where all the action happens at the end instead of sort of being spread out throughout the book. And then secondly, when you're writing action, anything that has nothing to do with the action, you're going to want to cut that out. That's just, it's not needed there. And you're also going to want to think about the hierarchy of psychological needs, where if something is coming after you and it has sharp, pointy teeth and claws and you're scared you're going to get maimed, you are not going to stop and think, oh boy, I'm glad we made it out of that situation alive. Oh, shoot, darn, I guess I'm in another situation. No, your concentration is 100% going to be on getting in that car and getting the hell out of there. What is just right about this novel?
Two things I really liked. The boy character was telling, like I said, in journal style, his story, which means it was written in his words. So, he would avoid using bad words. He would kind of talk around certain things.
So it was a 12-year-old telling a story. It was a 12-year-old's
point of view. And as someone who once a fantastically long time ago was 12 years old,
So old.
I can tell you that was a fairly accurate depiction of the way, a young boy would think that, even with all these crazy things going around him, if there is something that is a sexual topic, you'd kind of find that a little bit thrilling. I found to be very accurate.
Which sometimes it also works really well because you can do a lot of great things with that, where you have the story being told from this child's perspective. So things that he or she is seeing, they might not understand, but as an adult reading it, you're like, oh,
yeah. As an adult, you understand, the idea of a sadist. And then the other thing that I really, really liked was the world building. You know me and how I like not always whether or not the answer is great, but if you ask a really good question. And, the world that Red Harvey built is very much one that's decaying, that's falling apart. And it answers the question of, what kind of people would emerge in a supernatural fall of society? Specifically the type of evil that comes up. There's the evil demons. We can check those off the list. There's no motivation needed for an evil demon. That's, exactly.
They embody it. They're cool with it.
And then there's the bad people that society kind of suppresses, that once we remove police and jail and social order, these people kind of, the last man on earth, they bubble up and they can be, their sadistic tendencies, their psychopathic tendencies, can really come to the forefront. And then the third group that was really interesting to me that was kind of touched upon was good people who become bad. There's one character becomes an alcoholic and falls into drink as the answer and abandons their relationship. Another character becomes a cannibal. And, a third character kind of hints at, becoming the evil, the dark character. So I really enjoyed the world building in terms of that construct. And I'm surprised this is only, one book in the series, because I feel like there's certainly more stories to be told in this world.
All right. Well, how was that? That was not too painful.
It felt good.
It felt good?
Are we doing this again?
I think so.
I think not.
No. I've used my one wild card already.
Pretty much.
So again, that was A Grey Life by Red Harvey. Where can we find this book?
You can find this book on Amazon.
And who do you recommend read this book?
Because of the way the book's structured and the fact that it literally tells a grey life, a little bit more mature audiences, certainly more mature themes are coming up. Someone who likes the more horror elements of world building.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was the Goldilocks and the Three Cares podcast. I'm Crystal.
And I'm Andrew.
Until next time.
Keep reading?
Yes. Should I do it like you?
Well, what do you mean? How do I do it?
Hello and welcome to the Goldilocks and Three Cares podcast.
That doesn't sound like me.
Maybe a little manlier.